bit further. And so first, it would make several clarifying changes to the definition as it relates to individual water supply and sewer system. It would require private individual owners to pump out their sewage disposal system at least once every 5 years. And after the pump out, the owner is required to notify DEP within 30 days. Property owner would be required to also execute an easement, inspection, and maintenance agreement that will allow the director, either DEP or DPS, to access a property at any reasonable time to inspect the working sewer system. Further, the bill would expand the county's authority to use funds from the water quality protection charge to reimburse payments to property owners that have conducted a pump out. With that being said, we had a public hearing. At the public hearing, we had one speaker that was in opposition. Council has received additional written testimony in opposition from Bill 4021 from the Agriculture Advisory Committee, also from the Montgomery County Farmers Bureau and Montgomery County Agriculture Preservation Advisory Board. Today's packet discussed some of those opposition and offers some amendments. I do want to note that the racial equity and social justice statement anticipates that they could have a negatively impact on racial equity, and there are some amendments that were proposed that we will discuss for today. Not sure if the department has any comments or if the chair would like to recognize them, but stop right there.
I'd certainly like to recognize them. Mr. Shofar, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that gets it pretty good. We don't have anything to add. Basically, the main focus of the bill is to require septic owners to pump their tanks every 5 years.
Right. Mr. Soko, anything to add to that? Okay. Anybody? Nothing from DPS. Okay, great.
And so the first part of the discussion.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Reamer has a question.
And to make sure that we can give them whatever it is that they need to be successful in whatever pathway they choose. And I think that is one of the key tenets that we're going to talk about today, a little bit later on in our second item, where we talk about our college and career readiness and our adoption of the Maryland Blueprint for Education, and really talk about, again, what we see as the future of education. But I want to turn to my colleagues very quickly if they had any opening comments, because, again, this may be our last meeting in person together. So let me turn to Councilmember Navarro, followed by Councilmember Jawanda.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so this is such a pivotal, and I think actually the items on the agenda today are very aligned with the spirit of the commitment and dedication that this county as a whole has always.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I'll say it again. I'll say it again, Siri.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
There we go. No, I mean, there's a lot to reflect on. I believe, for me, on a personal note, obviously, having served on the Board of Education for 5 years, led that body for two years consecutively, but really, truly, education was the reason why I ended up in the space of public service. It's incredible how quickly time does fly, because when I joined the Board of Education, my kids were, elementary school, middle school, and now they're very successful young women in the corporate world doing amazing things, and many of the things they're doing are because of their experience in Montgomery County Public Schools. It is really due, it is a testament to this incredible institution, and all of us here collectively have an extraordinary responsibility, because we know that once an institution like Montgomery County Public Schools, once you let it slide a little bit, it's always difficult to get it back on track. An institution of that size.
For people who need hardship exemption, but the way the bill is set up, it would allow us to provide a reimbursement for all the septic owners to get a reimbursement, and they could get it. Originally, it was thought, we were thinking that we do it for every cycle. Now we're thinking that it might make sense just to do it for the first cycle, to get people into the program, to get them signed up, get them into the program, and then after that first cycle through that first 5-year period, we would stop the rebates.
property owners, Alan Sukup, there we go, Alan Sukup with DEP. Property owners would have to provide to DEP a confirmation or copy of their receipt for the pump out. We wouldn't just automatically give them $100.
Right, but is it your thought that every homeowner, at least in the first round, will get the $100? And then subsequent to that, there would be some kind of, are you envisioning a hardship reimbursement or a hardship exemption? I mean, we don't need to do an exemption if we can do a reimbursement, but.
Yeah, the legislation would allow us to do that. It's not spelled out, but we could do that in the legislation. Because it says we may provide a reimbursement, so it doesn't force us to do it.
So if you did $100 for each property, and how many septic properties are there?
There's about 19,000.
So what's that? 2 million? No. What is the math?
Yeah, it's about 2 million.
About 2 million. So what's the water quality impact?
So the financial
doing
impact
this.
statement showed that it would require $1.30, I think, that if we took that money, if we had to cover that expense on the water quality protection charge, it could raise the rate up to $1.30, I think the number was.
Okay, but what's the? I'm interested to know in the relative value of spending $2 million on rebating homeowners to pump their systems every 5 years for at least $100 towards the cost, versus what we could do with $2 million otherwise in the Water Quality Protection Fund.
So I'm not sure exactly what your question is.
I'm trying to find out what's the benefit of doing this from a water quality perspective. Can you quantify? Because you want to tap into the Water Quality Protection Fund, so that's money that
Right. So
would otherwise be going to other water quality work.
I don't think we don't have data on how many septic systems are leaking or need maintenance. So, it's going to provide a water quality benefit by making sure the tanks are pumped and that the systems are operating properly. The system's discharged to groundwater, so it would help protect our groundwater. To what level that would be, we don't have enough data to say how many systems are failing or how many systems aren't operating or how many systems haven't been pumped. So there is a water quality benefit to the legislation, but what that exact water quality benefit compared to spending that money otherwise, I think would be hard for us to quantify.
I mean, I imagine it's the best practice to pump your system every 5 years. How important? How many people do that? How common is that?
When we looked at the Glen Hills area several years ago, we distributed a survey and asked property owners about how they manage their septic systems. We were surprised to get as many results as we did. I think we had about a third of the property owners responded, which was a pretty good response. Excuse me. What we found is that maybe half of the property owners in the neighborhood were doing some kind of regular maintenance to their septic systems, pumping out. Others, at least had an inkling of what kind of management practices they needed to do to maintain their septic systems. But a surprising number had not pumped a septic system tank out for 10, 15 years. Some even said, well, I've never pumped my tank out, and I've lived here for 30 years, if you want to go anecdotally. So some people understand how to take care of their systems, others don't.
Now, so in that kind of case, does that mean that it's likely that system was leaking?
It is possible, certainly. What we've discovered is that septic systems of the age of the ones in Glen Hills, for example, many of the septic tanks installed at that time were not whole tanks that were simply dropped in place. They were constructed of block and mortar in place. And over time, that mortar breaks down. And the septic systems, instead of sending effluent into the drain field or into the seepage pit, simply drain directly into the ground underneath the tank. And that's not just in Glen Hills. It's for septic systems countywide of that era.
Now, this wouldn't change that because you're just pumping it out, but you would potentially find out.
You potentially find out hopefully the property owners will also request an inspection of the tank. That's usually pretty standard when they do a pump out. And that's where we tend to find problems with the septic tanks, leaking septic tanks. Oftentimes we discover these at time of property transfer because the lender will require an inspection of the septic system. And that is when we oftentimes find these problems with the septic tanks. And so you enter into a tug of war, if you will, between the buyer and the seller about who's going to fix the tank or who's going to replace it, or who's going to pay to get connected to public sewer if it's available.
Okay. All right. That's all for now.
Sure. Can I just follow? Yes, just a sec. Can I just follow? So, thank you for being here. So, if I get a septic system, I need a permit from DPS. I don't need a permit to pump one out, right? It's like buying a car. MVA knows how many cars are on the road. They don't know how many have replaced their brake pads this year, right?
Yep, Heidi Benham, DPS. That is correct.
Normal maintenance. Thank you, Heidi. So there's no data that DPS has about how many systems we have that are failing, how often they've been pumped out, how frequently they're pumped out, and or anything else about their maintenance. Correct?
Right. We do not have
And
that
nothing from
information.
MDE either.
They do not have that information either.
How will this bill interact with the households that are affected by the critical areas law passed by the state?
I don't think that this bill addresses critical areas, the critical area specifically.
I mean,
We don't have any critical bay areas here in
we have
Montgomery
none in
County.
the county. Okay,
None.
just want to make sure. Okay,
Yep.
There was a lot of houses. Okay. Is there any industry data on how often they're replaced or maintained or pumped out?
No, we have no industry data, and I think part of that is because the people doing this, the contractors, do not have to be licensed or certified.
I figured you'd say that. Okay. Right.
Well, I will add, though, legislation was passed this year that established the Board of On-Site Wastewater Professionals, and that board is going to be established by 2025, I believe. So it's a statewide requirement
Yeah.
for, yeah.
It's a very decentralized industry, right? A lot
It
of
is,
small
very much,
contractors
yes.
And no
Yep.
association, presumably,
Correct.
to speak for them.
Yep.
We weren't lobbied by anybody like that. Okay, great. All right, Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you. Good questions and conversation. And so, and if anecdotally, people have not normally cleaned out their septic, had it cleaned through the course of living there, and in some cases, or at least in one instance, upwards of 30 years. How did we derive the 5-year period? Why doing this? Why should we do this every 5 years?
Based on the OLO report that was commissioned by the council back in 2016, I believe, and also research that we did at DEP going into this program, the 5-year cycle appears to be a pretty good industry standard among the jurisdictions that have a pump out requirement. People might get away with pumping out every 10 years if there's only 1 or 2 people living in the house. But if you've got, a family of 6 or 7, definitely every 5 years, perhaps even more frequently. That's from a wide array of examples that we looked at.
Okay, that's helpful. It's, I see the merits of this and wanting to make sure that nothing seeps into the clean water system, clearly. But I do quite frankly understand the undue burden that this places on, I think it was 13% of the homes in Montgomery County, half of which are in the agricultural reserve, and trying to figure out that balance between making sure that their systems are good in functioning order, and not wanting to impose something additional. Is there? I think Councilmember Raymer was getting at this, and I'll ask it a different way. What other laws or regulations could be put in place to try and encourage? And it sounds like that's what we're just trying to do, trying to circumvent or shortstop a problem should one unfortunately happen.
So we've done some outreach already to septic owners. We've sent out a postcard and asked them to go to our website and register. So I guess if you wanted to take a step back, that would be just maybe outreach, doing some more outreach, reaching out to the people that have septics, encouraging them to pump their tanks, providing them with information. And
So I appreciate that. I'll share with you my initial reaction that sending out postcards, while that is a good communicative tool, asking in the postcard for them to go on to the county website and register, that's a non-starter, right? We know what open rates, return rates, answer rates are, and to do one or two steps additional. Now, should there be a postcard that says contact, quite frankly, one side would say, have you cleaned your septic system? In big bold with pretty colors, and on the flip side, maybe information on what they can do. And to Chair Hucker's point, we don't know how many have been cleaned over the last X number of years. Okay. So
We had a very rough estimate from about, I think, 3 years ago. We asked WSSC for information on how many visits there had been to the Muddy Branch septage port. When the tankers clean out a septic tank, they have to deposit that somewhere. They don't keep it. They don't want to keep it, and so they take it to a public system. In Montgomery County, the only access to a public system for that kind of waste is over on Muddy Branch Road in Gaithersburg. So WSSC had knew how many different loads had gone into the septic port, but that doesn't guarantee that it would account for, haulers that had gone, say, to Howard County or Frederick County.
Last question I have, or batch of questions. How many different businesses provide this service?
I think the list we came up with is we have about 60 companies who are licensed in the county as waste haulers.
Have we reached out to them and asked them what their recent activity has been in the county?
we have not done that. We have let them know about the legislation.
Sure.
But we have not tried to get any data from them.
So what's missing for me is trying to figure out how much of a problem this really is. And I would prefer to put a pause on the conversation and re-engage after you've reached out to these businesses to find out what they've actually been doing. And that way we can try and find the delta between the number of septic systems that are out there and how many have been maintained or cleaned during a set period of time, whether it's 5 years or 10 years. Before we try to fix a problem, I'd like to know what the problem is. So I yield back.
Thanks. My colleagues have had good questions. How did you decide on the size of the rebate? Actually, is there a different, you said refund earlier, is there a difference between a refund and a rebate?
We're using the word reimbursement. A rebate implies you get, there's a legal reason, and I can't put my finger on it, but our attorney suggested that we don't use the word rebate. There's a definition for rebate, and this isn't exactly a rebate.
You get a rebate for rainscapes, correct? It's a
Yeah.
rebate, not a refund. You get a rebate for MEA, installation from the MEA for installation of renewable energy projects. Isn't this? Anyway, you can get back to us with the legal reason.
Okay.
Yeah, don't expect you to remember that. How did you decide on
So
the
there's-
size of it and the source of it?
There's a couple programs in the state already that do rebates, Frederick County and Howard County. And I know Howard County for sure was $100. And so we figured we wanted to make it we wanted to be enough so people felt like it was incentive, but we didn't want to make it too much. So we thought $100 was a reasonable amount.
How widely is it adapted in Howard County
I don't know.
or Frederick? Okay. How'd you decide? So $100. Okay. You mentioned how you decided on that. Is there a concern about a flat fee versus a sliding scale? When I was in the General Assembly, we passed the water quality, the critical areas law through the committee I was on. It was hotly debated, and we required all septic owners to use best available control technology, and that was a significant expense for many of them. And there was a concern about equity, and we created a fund for them to which they could apply for those rebates. That was quickly exhausted, if I remember right. But it was based on on income. If we have a flat fee like this, as noble as the goal is, we will be receive concern that there will be disproportionate adoption of the fee by high income, high education, cyber savvy households, and not lower income ones, right? Like we have with language programs and MCPS and any other programs. How'd you decide on this proposal?
So, I mean, I think we're open to other methods. Again, it was primarily based on looking at what the other programs were and deciding that it seemed like a reasonable approach that we wanted to incentivize, but not overcompensate. But I think we're open to other approaches for providing a reimbursement / rebate. For example, if it would be needs-based, we could do a needs-based reimbursement based on need alone, and then that would be fine.
Okay. And now that I've asked about making it more complicated, on the other side, it's a modest rebate of $100. Is there any assessment yet of how much it costs DEP or finance to even process a $100 rebate? Because if it costs us $30 in staff time.
Yeah, in the impact statement on page 4 of the staff report, OMB estimated the cost, the annual cost would be about $472,000. That also included a new position in our division to handle the incomings and goings of that money,
Right.
and notices to the property owners about when they need to pump.
So it's about 25% of the
Now,
cost.
that's assuming that everybody
Yeah.
put in for the rebate in the first year, which probably wouldn't happen. But if we assume that everyone who was eligible for the rebate
Sure.
got the rebate, that's
So we'll have some of the, if there's a new position, we'll have some of the fixed costs regardless of how many people apply. Right. Okay. So, but it could be 25% of the cost.
We would
It's
have-
just going to the administration.
We would have significant operational costs even at just the beginning.
Right. And then finally, I wanted to ask, how'd you decide on the source, the water quality protection charge? This is definitely, I'm sure, an appropriate expense under the law, but it takes away from other very valuable programs, presumably, like rainscapes and other things, and septics are important, but not the biggest threat to
the
the watershed in our area. So,
The biggest thing was we get credit on our MS4 permit for pumping, for doing regular pump outs. So there's a, I don't remember what the number of impervious acres was, but it was several hundred impervious acres credit that we get on our MS4 permit by this pumping out.
If I pump out my septic system, what part of my property is considered impervious?
It's not, it's just the way the MS4 works is there's certain annual practices
Right.
that if you do them, you get impervious credit, even though it may not actually address a perviousness. It's a water quality issue. So MDE decided that if you pump your septic and you provide data to them that it was pumped, you can get credit towards your MS4 permit.
Right. No, that I remember. But can you describe the formula?
It's
Is it per system or per the size of the system?
I think
or
it's 0.06 impervious acres per septic pumped, something like that.
0.6
0.06
per system. 0.06 per every system, even though the soil is completely pervious. That's just counted under the law.
That's
So
the
we
way,
get credit.
That's the way MDE set it up.
Right. Alan?
We would get a credit for if everybody pumped out, and we could document that, we'd get a credit of about 76 acres per year on our MS4 permit, or about 378 acres over the 5-year cycle. A little bit for each property, but it adds up.
I think Ms. McCartney Green raised the question of, is WSSC ready to absorb? Do they have the capacity? If this were all,
So
if everybody applied for this and did this tomorrow?
we've been talking with WSSC. There are some.
We have some experts in the room.
I don't know if they were prepared to talk about this today, but they are working on doing some upgrades to their Muddy Branch facility to
Great.
to deal with.
Okay. Hello.
Brian Halloran, Capital Budget Section Manager for WSSC Water. As Steve said, we are working on upgrades at Muddy Branch to be able to process more trucks there. We are aware of the legislation, so we have a project in our engineering support program looking to handle the traffic.
What do you think of this bill?
I personally don't have an opinion.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Colleagues?
I shared my opinion at the closing of my comments, and I'd prefer to hold on this right now till we get some more information about what the problem is and how many septic tanks have been cleaned and need to be cleaned.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a significant requirement on property owners who have septic tanks. You're requiring them to do something that they probably should do, but they're not accustomed to doing. And I guess I'm not terribly averse to it, but it would be good to hear more about the benefit of taking this action, which I don't think has really been adequately thought through. I'm not sure what I think about getting hundreds of acres of credit in the. Am I understanding this correctly? In our MS4 permit.
76.
I mean, that's so. If that were the case, I think it would have a very positive fiscal impact, because don't we spend a lot more money than this on meeting our permit requirements? Am I missing something here? So I don't know. That's something that we ought to ask council staff to look into a little more, because we spend a lot per acre typically, and this would be a lot less. So I think a little bit more work with some of the community folks would be beneficial here. Convening. We got a letter against this from the Boyd Civic Association. I don't know if you had a chance to talk to them, but it'd be useful to do some outreach and hear what groups have to say. So I'm okay with holding on it for now as well, if that's will my colleagues.
Okay. So that's the majority of the committee. I'm okay with I think this is very well intentioned and important. I'm comfortable with the mandate and probably the source. It seems like the case hasn't been built yet for this, and many of the questions aren't answered. So I'd be happy to schedule another hearing on this. Seems like everybody wants to hold it for now, but I think there'd be time for us to come back if you can answer some of the questions and build a better case for it, a clearer case for it. Fair enough? Okay, good. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you to all the WSSC brass for waiting for this. At least the topic was kind of close to home this time. Mr. Beach, thank you for joining us. Mr. Shofar staying for this? Monica's here. Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Today we are dealing with Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission's spending control limits for FY24. We have a great and characteristically thorough packet from Mr. Levchenko. So unless my colleagues have any opening remarks, I'll turn it over to him and welcome everybody from WSSC for joining us. Thank you. From Finance.
Trying to get the slides up at the moment. I have them on the screen here, but they're not showing up on those screens, and I assume they're not showing up on yours, are they? At this moment?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. Well, hopefully the tech folks are listening to us now and can get that dealt with. All right, so what I'll do is I'm going to just provide sort of a summary. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just some quick slides to walk us through the process a little bit, remind us of what the process is. We've got a lot of folks from WSSC Water here that can answer questions, and we'll go from there. Real quickly on the schedule itself, this process is an annual process. It's been from our perspective, from the council's perspective, it's initiated in September with meetings with fellow staff from the Prince George's County side and with WSSC Water, and we work on assumptions and the long-range fiscal plan and so forth. I've got the other dates here as well, showing that both councils are having it work through their process. The Prince George's Council Committee of the Whole was meeting today, and their full council, which is the same, is meeting tomorrow on this. Last I checked. I don't know exactly where they are on their agenda today, but I'll contact them after this meeting. But the goal is to reconcile these limits by November 1st of each year. It is not a state law mandate. This is something that the two councils came together on through resolution. So it's very much a local initiated process intended to provide guidance to WSSC Water. The other important component is that is part of state law is that the WSSC budget does have a default provision in state law, which I'm sure Councilmember Hucker is very familiar with from his days at the state, that if the two councils don't agree on a budget at the end of the budget process in May, then the default budget is the proposed budget for WSSC Water. So that means the more reasonable from the council's perspectives that the proposed budget is, the better off everybody is. And the spending control limits process helps provide guidance to WSSC Water on their proposed budget. So it's important from that perspective of helping us get to a better place, however that happens, at the end of the budget process. And the goals, I've got a couple quick goals highlighted here. Obviously, to try to make sure that WSSC Water is adequately funded to meet its water and sewer service mandate, but also to meet various financial metrics that we'll talk about in a little bit. In the background, I've got on this slide, the limits are shown as these 4: maximum average rate increase, which is a lot of what we focus on because that drives some of these other numbers typically, but also debt service, new debt, and total water and sewer operating expenses. And as I mentioned before, the limits provide direction to WSSC Water going forward. But I also did want to mention that we are looking at a long-range financial plan, so it's the work group that looks at this is looking beyond just that first year, but what the councils formally adopt is that first year of limits. And the process has generally worked well over the past 20 years. The councils have actually agreed on limits the last few years. There were a handful of years where the councils did not agree on limits, but even in those years, what's typically happened is the proposed budget would then fall somewhere between the two limits, between the high and the low. So it still provides guidance to WSSC Water. And this is the rate increase history I'm showing here. I'm not going to dwell on it, but just to show that the process started back in FY96. And in fact, you can see there were actually some years with no rate increase, even in years where the limit itself was positive, 2% in one case. The councils ultimately agreed on a 0% or no change in the rate that year for 6 years. Now that happened to be during a process of reorganization at WSSC Water, so there were substantial cost savings achieved during that time. So that explains why those rates were low. More recently, you've seen the rates start to creep up again in the mid 2000s and mid 2000 or the teens of the 2000s, and that reflects a growth not just in their operating budget but in their CIP as they were. We significantly increased the CIP to address a lot of aging infrastructure, and so you started to see the rate increases creep up. And then more recently in 16 and 17. We introduced some increases in the fixed fees, so that had a one or 2 year impact on rates. But then you're back to the rate increases you're seeing from 18 on, starting to creep up again. I also did want to mention the last few years, the pandemic has had a significant impact on WSSC Water, especially with regard to past due accounts and total bills outstanding. They still are at pretty high levels thanks to the pandemic. And this chart here was provided by WSSC Water, showing that those trends since FY20. You can see it peaked in roughly November, December of FY21, and it's started to trend down a little bit since then, but still at historically high levels. And in terms of assistance, WSSC Water has not received any direct aid from the federal, state, or local governments for COVID-related relief. There has been some indirect federal assistance provided, I've noted here, and some indirect state and local assistance. Oh, did you have a question? I'm happy to stop as you have questions.
Can you go back 2 slides, please, Keith?
To the rate increases?
Right. Do you happen to have that data disaggregated by operating versus capital? You made that important distinction, but it's not on
Well,
the slides.
from the capital standpoint, you're talking about debt service. And
Right.
so, yeah, the debt service line, I can certainly provide how the debt service has increased over those years in terms of percentages. Average percentage increase over those 20 years. I don't have it in the top of my
Well,
head.
year by year would be more helpful than the
Uh-huh.
average. I mean, there are times it makes a whole lot of sense. We all agree. We do the same thing to make big capital expenditures if there's need, if there's low interest rates, if there's funding available, whatever. And there are times when I think we'd be concerned if the 9.9% increase certain
Right.
years we're all operating, for example. So
Right.
anyway,
Yeah, I
getting a
mean,
little
it
bit, getting that
varies.
separation will be helpful.
I mean, just my recollection is some years it may account for 3 or 4% of a rate increase, and other years it's less.
Right.
So it does vary from year to year. I mean, and I do have some slides later that show how we get to the base case of the 8% that was developed as part of this plan by WSSC Water staff.
And since you mentioned the federal funding, I don't know if Joe or Monica want to jump in, but why hasn't I know we brought this up last year, why hasn't, there's been a lot available, why hasn't WSSC received federal funding like other utilities around the country?
Well, we ask ourselves the same question. So the need was certainly there, as you're familiar with, but I believe all the COVID relief funding went directly to the state with an allocation to the counties. It did not come directly to a special authority like WSSC Water. And I should have started this with, for the record, I'm Joe Beach, Deputy
you.
General Manager
Yes.
at WSSC Water.
So how much did the state get?
The state has received, in COVID-related aid, several billion.
No,
dollars.
not in just in COVID aid,
Oh,
but
right.
in water infrastructure upgrades, funding.
Well, what they received
From the
was
Infrastructure
through
and Jobs Act
the
or-
various packages. I believe the latest was the American Rescue Package,
Correct.
ARPA.
And the infrastructure bill before that.
Yes, yeah, and it's up to the state how much of an allocation is made. Some of that went into the state revolving loan fund,
Right.
and we make annual applications to the SRF and do quite well. In the last 6 years, we've been awarded about $386 million. Most of that has not been the, COVID-related relief or the infrastructure bill. It's just the state's revolving fund.
Right, just we're at a political moment where people want to invest in water
Yeah.
infrastructure appropriately, water infrastructure rebuilding. Do you know how much water Baltimore Water received or DC Water?
In infrastructure funding, I do not. I'll turn over to our section manager, Brian Halloran.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. So in terms of ARPA funding, I don't believe the state of Maryland has awarded anything in the water infrastructure category about
To any water utilities?
to
Not
any
just-
water utilities.
Not just WSSC?
Yes.
Okay. They're just holding it?
They have awarded they've allocated most of the funding. I think they have a little over 170 million remaining to allocate as of their end of June report. But
And those were funds that were allocated for water infrastructure, maintenance and upgrades?
well, for the ARPA funding, water and sewer was an allowable category. And so about 3/4 of states have awarded funds in that category, but Maryland is one of the states that has not. Relative to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we submitted applications back in January for the state revolving funds.
Right.
And then the state decided to use that round of applications for the first round of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. We have, according to the state's intended use plan, we are going to be awarded about $7 million, I believe, from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have not received the official letters on that, but it's in their plan. And I believe, a good portion of that is grants overall, with the state revolving fund money that is the normal money allocated every year by the federal government. We're going to be awarded about $60 million in total. About $7 million of that is grants. So the bipartisan infrastructure law money, we got a lower percentage of that, but we got a higher percentage on the normal program side of things. And I believe we got around 20% overall of the funding that was awarded this year.
So you said the state received only 170 million from the IHAA, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act.
No, the 170 million that I mentioned earlier was the amount remaining unallocated from the
Unallocated.
ARPA awards,
Sorry.
which was several billion
And how much
dollars.
from the Jobs Act?
I believe from the bipartisan infrastructure law, I think it was about $140 million, but not all of that is water and sewer.
It's just eligible, right?
No, that is actually specifically given to certain programs. The ARPA funds, water and sewer is an eligible category.
Right. So you received how much from the infrastructure bill?
We've received nothing, but
Right.
they plan to award us about $7 million.
And you received how much from ARPA?
Nothing
Nothing. And there's 170 million unallocated.
in ARPA.
And in ARPA, correct. And then when you've raised this with our Intergovernmental Relations Department and our state delegation, what have they said to you?
I believe we've gotten recognition of the need, but that we have not obviously achieved any legislation to allocate the funding to us at this point.
How often, when's the last time you talked to them?
I believe we are communicating with them somewhat regularly. I think Commissioner Foster is involved in those communications.
I bet. Good for us. Hi, Commissioner Foster.
The last time I had communications with the Budget Secretary, David Brinkley, that was probably early October. At that time, he indicated they were still trying to figure out how they were going to make monies available to all of the water utilities. They certainly didn't want to just donate funds to the WSSC. They needed to look at what was happening in Baltimore and throughout the rest of the state. And just to see, I was sitting here earlier, I was sending the Secretary another note about where are we.
Good.
Solid follow-up right there.
We're so glad we have you here. So you're optimistic about the next 45 days or so?
Well, I was going to say, I was at one point very optimistic, but I'm certainly getting very concerned now that we are probably, 20 days away from the election, and there's going to be a change in administration. Hopefully we can follow through.
And those funds would stay in the account and be eligible for the new governor and, under the new rules, the assembly to allocate, correct?
Yes. But as you know, the big thing that's going to be this year is that there's a change in the way the budget process works.
Yes.
It's going to be the first time that the General Assembly is able to add to the budget.
Yes.
So that's going to be a new scenario in terms of how you get funding.
Right. No, that's what I was getting at. That's right. So has anybody met with the delegation about making sure that your needs are met? Since WSSC, of course, was created by the state, not the county. And as much as we want to give you a healthy new budget, I think all of our constituents want to make sure you're getting everything you can from the state as well, and the federal government.
I can certainly follow up with the legislative team.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be great. I think the whole council would benefit from that. Mr. Beach, sorry.
No, you're good. I didn't have anything to add to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I really appreciate it. And all your many years of expertise. Mr. Levchenko.
Okay. So in terms of building this base case that we start from, and I mentioned the long-range financial plan, one of the key elements that I mentioned earlier is to make sure that we're in good standing with the rating agencies. And I've noted here some information about the Fitch issue that came up last year for the first time, where WSSC Water got a negative outlook. While still being rated AAA by all three agencies last year and again this year, Fitch did maintain its negative outlook. And this focuses on what's noted here in quotes, sustained leverage above 10 times through FY23. If they were to do that, or failure to secure rate increases, of course, they don't pay the rate increases. We pay them, and our residents pay them. that satisfactorily support operations while ensuring the ability to continue capital investment and maintain satisfactory liquidity and declining leverage. So that leverage, that 10 times leverage ratio is one I'll show in a minute. It's one of the metrics they use in the long-range financial plan to try to stay below that 10 times level. And I will note, Moody's and S&P don't have the same negative outlook or formal negative outlook, but they did mention some of those same issues in their letter as well. So that's sort of one sort of overriding concern in developing the plan. So we do have these metrics that have to accommodate that Fitch issue, but also you've got a number of other metrics we'll talk about. And as I mentioned, you've got the pandemic that complicated some of that over the last few years. So the screen's a little bit small, but this does show the major metrics and the policy goals in the first column, and then how the 8% base case with all the expenditures and assumptions we'll talk about would get us or keep us within those metrics, not just in FY23 where we are now, but also going forward through FY29. Just as an example, you can see days of operating reserve on hand. The policy goal was 120 to 150 days. They actually exceed that over time, but it does start to decline near the end of the 6-year period. However, you've got fund balance, for instance, quite high. Many years ago, fund balance was basically the only metric. Get it 10% and you're good. But these other metrics wouldn't be accommodated at a 10% fund balance, especially the cash on hand. So the fund balance metric is significantly higher than it used to be over time. And the debt service coverage and leverage ratio, they're somewhat complicated formulas, but your debt and your amount of debt versus your revenues and expenditures create those different ratios depending on which one you're calculating. And so there are guidelines for those as well that the financial plan is intended to meet. So that's sort of a foundational point. They see if we have our revenues moving in a certain direction or expenditures moving in a certain direction, what does that mean for these metrics? And talking about revenues first, and a lot of this is repetitive from past years that the committee's heard. First, just to set the table, water and sewer rate revenue, the volumetric rates that customers pay, is the dominant revenue source for WSSC Water, about 87% of their revenue. And unfortunately, that rate revenue is projected to go down. Remember I mentioned earlier about water production, or actually we'll talk about that in a minute. Water production's been flat for about 20 years, despite increases in population. So per capita usage is way down. So keep that in mind. Also, there have been, with WSSC Water's rate structure change and with the pandemic, we've had also some complications in predicting the revenue that you would get from that rate structure. So if more customers fall within the lower rate tiers, then you generate less revenue. Or if you have uncollectible revenue, which I mentioned earlier is much higher, that also complicates and makes your revenue stream not look as good. The other thing to note over the starting last year and assumed this year as well, as part of this base case scenario, WSSC Water's fixed fees, the infrastructure renewal fee and the account maintenance fee, are pegged to go up at the same increase as the volumetric rates. So that brings in a little bit of revenue that means the rates don't have to go up quite as much. It's a marginal change. But it also does have the side benefit of customers in the customer assistance program who do not have to pay the fixed fees, then are seeing a slightly higher subsidy from year to year based on those fixed fees going up. So they benefit a little bit more than the typical customer in terms of their bill. So I did want to show is, this is a chart that we asked WSSC to do. There's a lot of lines here. But what I wanted to show is this water production line over since 2000 and how relatively flat that is. Whereas a lot of the measures that show have cost implications are going up. Population served, customer accounts, total miles of pipe, sewage treated, those numbers are all up even as the major revenue source is down. And then the work years, this is sort of an interesting trend. As I mentioned, there was a reorganization in the early 2000s, and so the work years dropped substantially. But since about the mid to late 2005, 2006, they started to go up again as we started dealing more with the aging infrastructure and needs that were identified going forward. And this is just another result of all of that is WSSC Water's rates have gone up significantly more than their expenditures because of that revenue issue I mentioned. So WSSC rates over the past 20 plus years have gone up about 159%. Their approved expenditures have gone up about 91%. So that differential is that revenue problem. That you can imagine if the county had a property tax trend like that or an income tax trend like that, that would be a significant concern. So this chart just puts all the numbers together. I'm not going to go through each one, but it shows when you do all these puts and takes, you actually have a slight decline in total funds available starting out. So that number, and this number does already assume an increase in those fixed fees that I mentioned of about $6 million or so. So this gap without the fixed fee increase is actually closer to about $8 million that they have to overcome. So on the expenditure side, these assumptions are necessary in order to build that side of the equation. First, they assume to fund the debt and all the costs associated with WSSC Water's proposed CIP. There is a large increase in PAYGO assumed in the forecast, and that's partly to help with debt, but also to help with some of those metrics I mentioned earlier, in the debt service coverage and the goal of keeping debt within about 40% or less of total expenditures. So PAYGO is one of the strategies to do that. And then you have your year-to-year cost inflators that they have to assume. Salary and wages, inflationary increases, and heat, light, and power are shown on this slide. Of particular note, heat, light, and power is showing a very significant increase, primarily because of significant increases in natural gas, as you can imagine from all the issues in Europe. And that also flows into electricity costs elsewhere in the United States. So this heat, light, and power has typically not been anywhere close to this increase in recent years. It's been more in the 3 to 5% range per year, but here we're seeing a pretty big increase. And then some of the other costs that are built in, regional sewage disposal costs that are, it's a formula based on the intermunicipal agreement with DC Water for the allocation, the operating expense allocation for the Blue Plains treatment, and that's expected to go up about $3.9 million. Additional and reinstated programs like last year, WSSC Water has a long list of things they would like to do, they may need to do based on new mandates, but since they're not in the current budget, they're assuming to have to accommodate these within these numbers going forward. So they're not in the middle of their budget process yet. They still have a lot of work to do between now and then to get there. But we expect some of those items to appear in their budget for next year. And then the other thing, once again, to help with the metrics, is there's a contribution to cash balance reserves to help with the cash on hand and fund balance, et cetera. They had about a $16.3 million contribution last year, and there's about a $14.2 million contribution this year within this base case, once again to help with those metrics. So the result of all that is the base case that was the subject of the public hearing a couple weeks ago. You have a gap of about $65 million in projected revenue that 8% rate increase and the fixed fee increases would cover. The four limits I show here for new debt service, and operating expenses are what come out of that, and the average rate increase of 8%. Now, I will say the long-range financial plan does assume another year of 8% rates in 25, but then a significant decline in 26 through 28 and 29, dropping into the fives. So that's how the numbers work out in the base case. And this is just displaying on the chart some of those items we already talked about. And with the fixed fees built in, you have about a $59 million gap to cover. And this is how those different numbers play out. Now, you'd mentioned earlier, Mr. Hucker, debt service. This year, debt service is not as big of an issue in the rate increase this year. You're looking at about a $6.6 million increase in debt service, which is almost 1% on the rate. So that's lower than it's been in past years. And WSSC can speak to some of the trends they're seeing in debt service. Now, of course, we're seeing increases in interest rates going forward, but WSSC also did a significant bond refunding within the last year, which saved a significant sum of money as well. And we also do have some major projects concluding in the 6-year period. So that can also help with debt. But as you know, debt is a bit of a ship to steer, and it takes a long time to make a significant difference in it. But some of the big increases, I mentioned heat, light, and power. That's a 1% increase, which is pretty high for that category. Maintenance and operating is seeing a significant increase, mainly because of higher than normal inflation that is projected. I think I had mentioned it earlier. It was, in 24, based on their current experience, they're looking at about a 7.4% inflationary adjustment for that. Now, it drops back down to more typical levels after that, assuming the market resets and gets back to a typical level. But it's very high in 24, and that's driving that maintenance and operating category quite a bit. So one of the things the work group looks at, the Bi-County work group, is what are some different scenarios we can look at here. This chart just presents a snapshot of how the costs are built and what the impact is with each 1% rate increase. Each 1% rate increase, along with the fixed fee increases, gets you about $8.1 million in revenue, or if you reduce a rate increase, then that increases a reduction needed, or unspecified reduction by about that same amount, 8.1 million. So that's sort of how you would build an immediate gap or surplus from year to year. And along those lines, we haven't mentioned the customer yet. The customer bill impact at each rate increase is shown here. For every 1%, the average customer impact is about 86 cents a month, or about $2.57 quarterly. And then you can see the corresponding impact at sort of different rate increases here. And this assumes a typical residential customer 165 gallons per day. Also, comparing WSSC Water to others, I've got a number of slides here that WSSC Water provided. The bars on the right compare WSSC Water to some regional comparable water utilities, as well as some other ones on the East Coast. And WSSC Water is about in the middle in terms of an average residential bill. So that would be all the fixed fees, as well as the volumetric rates. And then some of these other utilities may have different rate structures, so it takes into account those as well. So they're about in the middle, significantly lower than Baltimore and Washington, but higher than Fairfax. So that is what it is. In terms of rate increases, this chart shows some of the local utilities and the rate increases that have either occurred since FY19 or are projected based on what they are presenting publicly. And you can see the 8% base case built into the long-range financial plan is what WSSC Water is showing on the top. You can see DC Water's projections going out, as Baltimore cities don't go quite as far out, and Fairfax County. So some other scenarios that we asked WSSC Water to look at. My thoughts on the scenarios was to try to get them to the same place by the end of the 6 years, but see if there's a way to have a more gradual approach or a softer landing. So staff suggested maybe slightly lower increases in the first couple of years, and then bring them back to about the 5%, which is where they were in the base case by FY29. And I did want to note we received a memorandum from the executive on his recommended rate increase approach, and it was a bit of a range. He had indicated in his memorandum he was open to an 8% rate increase, but recognized if the council wanted to go lower, he suggested trying to stay at least as high as 6.5%. So we have the range for what it's worth. So in terms of these scenarios, WSSC Water did provide basically updated long-range financial plans, if you were to assume those rates. And the two areas that are affected are basically the cash reserves, especially in 24, because that's an immediate way one can lower the rates. Remember, there was the $14 million contribution. So under all the scenarios, the cash reserves would be reduced in order to achieve that 7% reduction in 24. One of the scenarios, the lowest rate increase over the 6-year scenario, also required some expenditure reductions in FY24. But then the expenditure reductions for all the scenarios mostly begin in FY25 and are quite significant under scenario 3, which I showed on the screen earlier. See, scenario 3, you're basically at a 6% rate increase and then drop to 5 late in the 6 years. Scenario 2 is a little bit ramped down a little bit, and then scenario 1 I mentioned earlier, you start at the 7 for the 2 years instead of the 8, but then you're actually a little higher in 26 and 27. So that softens the impact a little bit. So scenario 1, you have some permanent reductions required in 25 and some one-time reductions in 25. Scenario 2, those numbers are a bit higher, and then scenario 3, they're much higher. So from staff's perspective, I felt that scenario 1 gets us where we want to be at the end. It has some impact on expenditures in 25 especially, but seems like a reasonable alternative to the base case and provides less of a big jump down from the first 2 years to the third year. Also, all the financial metrics we talked about earlier would be achieved under these scenarios, although I will say scenario 3 really does push the Fitch leverage ratio much closer to the 10 times number, so I'd be very concerned about that scenario with that. But I think scenario 1 still keeps us in pretty good shape. In fact, those metrics over the past couple of years have improved because of the increases in the cash balance that WSSC Water's been able to do. And I think that's all I have on my slides, but we have a lot of folks here that can answer questions about all of this information, of which there is a lot. A lot of details behind all this, and happy to go through whatever areas you would like to today.
Yes, we have an embarrassment of intellectual and experiential riches here. Mr. Beach, do you want to start us off?
I would just say Keith, again, has an excellent package. It was very thorough. And I can see the basis of his recommendations. Of course, we're here to advocate for the base case, but we do work with both counties to what you think is appropriate. But the last couple of years have been very challenging for us. As you know, we actually had to implement spending reduction plans mid-year in FY 20, 21, 20, 21, and 22, as well as some other pretty large capital reductions in the FY 23 capital budget in order to sort of deal with the improving our financial situation as well. So last few years have been difficult, but we've been able to respond to that, I think, effectively.
Ms. Hawkins, anybody else? Okay. Colleagues, please. Councilman Perez.
Thank you for the presentation, detailed as it was, very, very much as always. So I'll just start with a broad observation that I'm concerned. And the concerns largely stem from the Fitch downgrading and the sentiment shared by S&P and Moody. And so, Mr. Beach or anyone else from your team, can you elaborate as to why you think the credit agencies are expressing concern?
Just to clarify, it was only one credit rating agency that expressed concern, and that was Fitch, and they took us from a stable outlook to a negative outlook. We were not downgraded. We retained the AAA ratings. I just want to make sure that it's S&P and Moody's did rate us both a AAA with a stable outlook. Within all of their write-ups for all of the credits that they do for each jurisdiction, they indicate what would improve the rating or what could cause a problem for the rating. And I think Mr. Levchenko used some language from, I think, the S&P write-up about what could cause a downgrade, and deterioration in rate increases, reserves, or revenue stability, in their view, could cause some problems for our AAA rating. So I think in general, the rating agencies have a very positive view of what our financial status is right now. They're concerned about especially the stress caused by the pandemic and the increase in delinquencies and the impact that had on our revenues. Now, for the most part, we were able to mitigate that by our mid-year spending reduction plans. But when Fitch does their rating, they actually rate us according to a different methodology than S&P and Moody's. They look at us from a utility model. So it has different criteria than, for instance, S&P and Moody's would use, which is more of a tax-supported model. So what they do is they look at our financial condition, they look at our estimate for the future 5 years, and then they add a stress test to that. That is, they increase our capital expenditures by 10% and then look at how our financial metrics look under that condition. And so it was that stress test that indicated that our funds, that our leverage ratio or our debt compared to funds available for debt service was over 10x. And that was the main thing that caused them concern. As you can see, by our estimate, we've gotten in 23 through 29 that leverage ratio below 10 through a combination of spending reductions, capital controls, as well as revenue increases through increased rates. So I think we've got a pretty solid plan moving ahead to maintain the AAA bond rating.
So I appreciate the clarification, and you are correct. The concern with the negative outlook, as opposed to S&P and Moody's, while not specifically providing a negative outlook, but sharing many of the similar concerns, and that's the important part.
Right.
Right. And as you noted, S&P and Moody have a tax-supported model, and if I were to interpret their methodology, I would infer that they recognize that they have 2 counties and a state government who are going to ultimately be there to support WSSC should something happen. And so recognizing there is a safety net even underneath that might influence their thoughts. But with Fitch having a different model, recognizing there's something in the water that they need to look at or throw a cautionary tale on, that's what I'm picking up on.
Sure.
And I mean, the big question here is, how is this sustainable in general, right? What more do we need to do? What do we need to rethink? Because I remember 3 years ago joining this committee and getting the deep dive in this conversation and recognizing that population changes and water consumption per capita and the charts here today show that it's not really moving the needle. So what do we have to do differently? Because I'm not quite sure that the year after year increases is sustainable, and clearly I think the rating agencies are the canary in the coal mine saying something needs to change.
Well, a few things in response to that. First of all, we're in the same sort of position every water utility throughout the country is. They all, they're all facing that same challenge. The better conservation from customers, more efficient fixtures and water using devices have brought that down, that per capita consumption. So we're all selling less of our product. And so we all have that similar challenge. So our long-term plan is to increase our non-rate revenue revenues from non-rate sources. So we've talked to you before about our innovation program. We recently had a patent for a universal fire hydrant, a tool that will work on all different types of fire hydrants. It was basically invented, fabricated in-house, and we were able to get that patented. We're working on licensing negotiations with other utilities and manufacturers for that as well. We're looking across all of our real estate assets right now and looking at how can we increase our revenues, monetize those assets, what can be surplus, and how can we use those revenues, especially in infrastructure investment, and take the burden off the ratepayer. I want to stress those are long-term strategies. It takes a while to ramp up those efforts and get meaningful revenue from those. We've also have been working on the expenditure side. The innovation program has identified some ways to bring down spending, at looking at reducing our chemical buys, using more organic processes to reduce our reliance on chemicals and treating wastewater and water as well in the filtration process. So that can have some positive impact on the expenditure side. And then we've been able to bring down our overtime expenditures in the last 5 years by about almost $10 million through changing shift schedules, making sure that there's better reporting for managers to work with. So it's a combination of those strategies. We've got to work both on the top line in terms of revenue, but also expenditures as well to bring those down. And it's a year-by-year, we have a financial forecast, but it's a year-by-year struggle to achieve that as well.
You listed a lot of things, right? Some of them external, some of them innovation and new businesses to pursue, and some of it is internal, as you just mentioned, bending the curve on overtime and some other internal things as well. Just want to reiterate that I hope you all and the commissioners and the leadership that we all know is evolving over the next few months are committed to this, to helping bend the curve and figure out what needs to be done, because I will again say I'm not sure that this is sustainable. And the charts, the data, and the rating agencies, I think, support that sentiment. And so whatever it is we have to do to get some more creativity, I am in support of. Last question I have harkens back to a question I asked about a year ago, I think during this same conversation, when I read during this same session some emails and comments on social media of people in Montgomery County, constituents who were expressing concern and alarm over extraordinarily high water bills, and not understanding what those what those high rates were for, what those costs were for. And it was shared to me at the time in that public session that they were essentially anomalies and that they're being worked out. Where are we in that? About the billing system and about residents who are alarmed when they open up their bill and see that is not what they expected.
Okay, first of all, with the billing system is we consider the billing system project implemented about 3 years ago to have been successful. From day one of go live, we've been able to produce accurate on-time bills. It provided us with an accounts receivable system. It provided us with data we did not have before on a daily basis on how well we were doing in terms of on-time billing, our field activity, the number of delinquencies and so forth. So that's been very positive. The cost was higher than we had expected, but I think overall that's been beneficial. So in terms of the high bills, those are typically caused by on-premise leaks where there's a toilet running they're not aware of, there's a faucet dripping, or even worse could be an on-premise leak after the meter below ground, and that's you're not even aware of that. So that's typically how the cause of those high bills. It also could be an estimated bill. They weren't able, for weather or whatever reason, to timely read that meter, and so there was an estimated bill that has to be reconciled later with an actual read. It also could be a bad meter read. In our experience, it's typically an on-premise leak that's causing those high bills. We do have a high bill adjustment policy that allows for once every 3 years to reduce by about 50% that excessive use. And so we do, use that policy for thousands of our customers who apply for the high bill adjustment. We're actually reviewing that policy right now to see where we can make some changes, give ourselves some more flexibility and our customers more relief. But it's a difficult, policy to manage because we want to get those on-premise leaks corrected so there's not an undue, loss of water as well. And so, that's pretty much what we're looking at.
I'll say that last year I was told that it was largely due to on-premise leaks or unpaid bills. And anecdotally, I've heard of stories where that just wasn't the case. And so I just want to make sure that you're saying that it is not the billing system that is the cause here.
Yeah, the billing system doesn't make up usage. The billing system receives what is given to it by the meter reads, by the meter readers, by either the handheld, by the manual reads, or by our automated meter reading system that, is about a smaller percentage of our customers have.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation, Mr. Beach. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. I mean, can you just restate for me the Fitch comments? Are those? Or maybe I'll direct this to Keith. But are they fundamentally about pessimism that WSSC could get the rate increases from the county that it needs, or is it something different?
You mean the Fitch compared to the other rating
Just what it said.
No, I think the Fitch comment is specific to that leverage ratio that Mr. Beach mentioned.
I see.
The Moody's S&P, which I think Mr. Glass just mentioned, WSSC Water does have an ad valorem tax capability as a nuclear option, if you will, that it's never used, but it's out there. And so if a calamity occurred, they would have a financial mechanism to survive. And so that helps in terms of, the agencies looking at that as a fallback, hopefully to never be used. But I think really the significant difference over the past decade has been Fitch moving to this new, its own particular metric that WSSC Water then had to adopt. And that's driven some of its numbers to try to get that below that, into that policy level that they want. Before that, also the previous comments from the rating agencies have included a desire that they have a higher cash on hand, and so they started ramping that up a number of years ago. So it's a matter of trying to be responsive to them while not having to have 20% rate increases. I think This year, the base case had 8%, but it also shows it declining in the 6 years. So to me, that does not show necessarily a calamity occurring. That just shows that we maybe have a reset needed early, whether it's 8% or 7%, and then hopefully these other assumptions, and there's a lot of assumptions built into this, hopefully they play out. Hopefully the inflation does moderate after year one. Hopefully debt service doesn't go through the roof over time. I mean, there's a lot, after year one, the reliability of any forecast just becomes much more difficult. But you have a point in time, and you have to do your best to say where are we and where will we be in 6 years. And the rating agencies' metrics are part of that.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Beach, can you elaborate? I know I've talked to you before and after meetings you were holding with some of our federal delegation. Senator Cardin obviously has been a leader in this area for so long, and Leader Hoyer. What were the takeaways from those meetings and the outcomes? How effective have they been at getting federal support for your capital budget?
Well, I think it always helps to get in front of them and make your case as well. I think they understand the need. We're one of many very urgent priorities that they hear about. I think the fact that you see that water infrastructure has been gaining more attention, more allocation in this the federal infrastructure bill, and ARPA has reflected not just our efforts, but the efforts really of other water utilities and associations that represent us. So we do see sort of that understanding of the importance of water, the importance of investment in infrastructure is beginning to make a difference, but we believe a lot more needs to happen, a lot more investment in this. And I just would say a case in point, the most recent, is what you've seen, unfortunately, in Jackson, Mississippi, where there was not the appropriate investment on an ongoing basis in that utility, and it eventually caused a crisis. Now, our crisis, thankfully, we were able to help out. We sent a few teams down there during September and in this month to help them out. Their takeaway when they came back, those teams, was it was just a lack of investment, ongoing investment in the water plant, in the staff, in the distribution system.
Right, no, understood. I think all of our concern is not the investment itself, but just that the assurance that Montgomery County isn't the only pocket that it's coming out of.
Understood.
You mentioned your efforts to broaden sources of revenue, which we've talked about for years. Are there any new developments you want to share on that front?
Well, I can provide you information after this. We did prepare a summary of our innovation programs and ones that we're working on right now, some that have concluded, and the benefits of those programs, both in terms of the technology, the service improvements it's brought, but also in some cases additional revenue, or at least the potential for additional revenue, and some savings that they've have brought about as well. I can mention another one of which would be the use of drone technology to monitor our field infrastructure. I mean, we have a very large, footprint, about 1,000 square miles. A lot of our assets are in remote areas that are difficult to see manually. We've been able to develop and use drone technology to sort of see, is there a manhole cover off in the stream? Has it been sheared off? Is it sort of taking on an inflow that it shouldn't? And that's just an example of something where it's more cost effective, it's quicker, and it sort of supports our operations as well. And that's something I think we've been successful in sort of pushing that down to more departments, not just in our strategy and innovation office. It's in our engineering and construction department, our production department, and it's sort of catching on more and more with staff, with project managers, to look at how can we do this differently, how can we save some money. And I think part of that is just sort of a cultural change over time.
So you'll report to us on some of those?
Yes, yeah.
After this hearing, you said?
Yes.
You have new information you want to share? Okay. And speaking of perennial issues, you all did so much work on the new rate structure. We still have the uniform structure right between residential and commercial. If there is if there is proposed legislation in the new General Assembly, are you all prepared to support bifurcating the rates between commercial and residential customers?
I don't want to speak for our commissioners who are responsible for taking that action, but.
In the past, they have.
Yes, we've been very supportive of that in the past, yes. And I think we'd certainly be very open to considering that.
Do you have any reason to believe that they would have changed their position on that important matter?
I have heard nothing recently.
You've heard nothing. Okay. Great. Anything else, colleagues? Okay. Mr. Levchenko, do you want to remind us of the calendar? Do we need to make a recommendation today?
Oh, yeah.
Can we wait on Mr. Beach's new information?
Well, right now, I mentioned the Prince George's Council is looking to take action tomorrow. Certainly what this committee does would be a helpful signal to them. Our schedule is to bring this back to the full council next Tuesday, the 1st, to meet that self-imposed deadline that the two councils have. Staff's interest would be to see if the committee could come to a recommendation today. If there's more information you want, we can certainly provide that, whether it's on the new technologies or comparative rate analysis, or with other utilities or federal aid, anything like that. We can work with WSSC Water to get that, and certainly to the degree that informs the budget. I mean, we've got lots of time on the budget before May of next year. But in terms of spending control limits, we're sort of coming up on our deadlines. So, I mean, staff's recommendations I noted earlier was the scenario 1, which for purposes of, where is it here?
Table 6.
There it is. The committee would be expressing support for a rate limit for 24, not 25 through 29. That's not on the table today. This is just showing how the long-range financial plan would work out. And then the other limits I mentioned earlier, new debt service, and operating expenses would not change under that first scenario. So those would be what the base case showed for those limits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, any wisdom to share with us?
Well, the Chair Bayonet wanted me to remind you that with our Piscataway Bioenergy Facility, we're also going to become, we already are licensed by the state to be a natural gas retailer and renewable natural gas retailer, and we hope to begin shortly to begin that. We're actually negotiating a contract right now with Montgomery County to be a supplier for that as well. And that we expect that to produce some income as well. I'm not sure the net of that.
To produce some income.
Yeah. Yeah. But and that's another, yeah.
Selling natural gas to Montgomery County?
Yes.
Can you give us a ballpark on the scale?
Can I get back to you afterwards? I'd hate to give you the wrong information.
Sure, sure. I forgot to ask too. I'm glad you've engaged in, this has been, so many issues that have been around for years, in your negotiations with the Teamsters over the contract for the meter readers that were previously unrepresented in other job categories. I understand that's a little bit stuck, and what's your prediction for the timeline of when you would wrap that up and ratify the contract?
That's a,
Or is there anything we could do to?
It's ongoing. I mean, we
to help?
actually met with them last Friday, I believe it was, and we're building a contract from the ground up. They're a brand new,
Right. No, I understand, yeah.
labor organization. So we're building it every article right now. My feeling is definitely not stuck. It's
Okay.
just
I
difficult
understood you were only
business.
talking like twice a month. Is that
Yeah,
incorrect?
about that, yeah. But I think we're making progress on that. It is a difficult business to do it from the beginning. I've worked on a lot of different labor contracts before.
I know,
But I've never
yeah.
done one right from the beginning,
beginning.
every article,
It's a new
every.
unit, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we're definitely making progress.
When do you think you'll have it wrapped up?
I would expect, again, can I get back to you? I would expect where we're at right now to be able to complete early in 2023. But there's, like I said, there's a lot of issues to go through. There's a lot of
So January,
operational
not December.
issues. Yeah. Early 2023.
Okay.
Calendar year 23.
Okay. Great. Okay, colleagues. I think we can make a decision. Just myself, I'm always very attentive to your ongoing capital and operating needs and the inflationary environment you're finding yourself in, of course. And we don't want to be anywhere. We don't approach, anything like Jackson, Mississippi. And your point's well taken. Our ratepayers are also in very difficult economic times these days. And this is one area of inflation that we have some control over, whereas we don't over gas prices and milk prices and many other things. And, for me, not knowing who the next general manager will be, what their fiscal path they'll take in terms of both cost savings and expansion will be, and knowing that today we're not doing any not passing any binding limits, this is the friendly suggestion period of the year. I'm more comfortable with scenario 2, and looking forward to the additional information that Mr. Beach DGM Beach will provide us ASAP, I guess, right? Okay, on some of these other fiscal matters. Anybody else?
I'm okay with scenario 1, the one that staff has recommended.
So we all know that the best system is a maintained system, so that is the baseline here, and we want to make sure that there aren't any problems and that we don't replicate what has happened in other jurisdictions. And I don't think we're there, and we're not going to get there. But I agree with scenario 2, and the reason is because as the leadership team and a new general manager is selected, I think that individual needs to understand the new course that we have to go down. And I think it forces an important conversation rather than walking into one where it's business as usual. And so for those reasons, I support scenario 2.
Okay. Mr. Lemchenko, I think we
Yeah,
have
I
a
just
recommendation.
wanted to, just verifying, I think scenario 2, the difference is in FY25 in the rate increase dropping to 6.5%. In 25. So I'm just looking to see if that affects the limits in 24. I think they might be identical to scenario 1, I thought.
Right, my view is if it's a 7% in FY '24,
Right.
it's going to have, between scenario 1, scenario 2, for FY '24, it's going to have the same impact.
Yeah, I'm just looking just to verify that. Yeah, they're the same. So the in some ways, what you're doing is more sort of projecting towards what you might want to do next year, in a sense. But the key element for today would be that it's a 7% rate increase in '24.
Right.
And with the corresponding other limits, as we talked about.
With the optimistic, friendly suggestion that we might be able to limit the cost increases more in FY25.
Exactly.
Right,
Yes.
under the new leadership. Right.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right. Everybody's reasonably happy. All right. Thanks so much. We look forward to the additional information you want to send us, and thanks for spending your afternoon with us.
All right, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.